we tend to see what the other person is doing, who they're being, how they're acting, how they're treating us, and we put all of our attention and focus on that. And a lot of the time, we need to bring the attention back inwards and look to see, how am I reacting to how this person is treating me? What's actually coming up? What's being activated within me? And how is that communicating to me where I would like to shift, or where I need to heal, or where I need to grow?
Hi, Krista. It's so good to see you.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here too. And I'm so excited to talk with you today and for everyone to hear all the things that you're all about. I've known Krista for not that long, but what feels like a very, very long time.
You immediately said that, and I was like, "No, we've known each other for years." It's like,
I
"Wait,
know.
is that actually true? Maybe just a couple of years?"
We have known each other for years, but not as many years as it feels like.
I know, it feels like lifetimes, honestly. I think
Y-
we instantly connected when we met.
I think so too. And from
Mhm.
there, it just has been, for people that know me, I live in Portugal and you live in Portland, which is my old home. But we still meet every week. You're the only friend that I talk with almost every single week.
You are I just love we have it on our calendar as a tea date, and I don't know if we actually ever even drink tea, but for some reason, that was how it started.
Yeah,
And now we also have your baby girl that joins in as well too, and so it just becomes this, like, fun little hangout every single week, and my heart always looks forward to it.
me too. And I do drink tea. You could
Do
drink
you
coffee
drink
because it's
tea?
your
I
morning,
do
but
drink
occasionally I drink my
coffee.
tea. Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive in. So, today we're going to talk all about you and how you support people in the world. So, tell me a little bit about what you do.
This has been such a journey of transformation and has kind of, as almost any entrepreneur knows, it's taken all kinds of different turns and twists. And I've now settled back on what's funny enough where I started originally. Funny how our intuition works. I am a mentor for spiritual integration, energetics, and relationships. So I basically work with people understanding their inner guidance system, understanding how their external world is showing up, and what that's showing them about where their next moves come from, how their consciousness is showing up for them, how conscious they are from one move to the next. And usually, a lot of the time, we use the tool of relationship to figure that out, to have our best external mirror.
Yeah, you are so good at this. I think since I've met you, you have catapulted my self reflection in these areas
Mm.
of my life in a really special way. And I just think that this is absolutely your superpower. So I'm so glad you circled back to this and landed on it because I think the world needs more of it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's just what I love. It's what I love to study, It is just kind of what's always come very intuitively to me. And I think that I struggled with thinking that it was just so easy because it came so intuitively to me that nobody needed to hear anything about it. And now it's just something that I absolutely love and I love working with people with.
Yeah, I love that. So there's a lot there that you just kind of touched on. I think a good place to start is relationships and kind of how they can help guide us and show us things we may not be thinking about. Can you
Mhm.
tell me a little bit more about that? Like, how do you work with people in that way?
Yeah, so I think that a really big piece of how relationships show up for people is that we tend to see what the other person is doing, who they're being, how they're acting, how they're treating us, and we put all of our attention and focus on that. And a lot of the time, we need to bring the attention back inwards and look to see, how am I reacting to how this person is treating me? What's actually coming up? What's being activated within me? And how is that communicating to me where I would like to shift, or where I need to heal, or where I need to grow? And so I love working with people, especially in romantic relationships, because we care so much about our partner. We want that soulmate love. We want that big energy that just feels so supportive and connective. And yet, when our partner doesn't show up perfectly for us, or when our relationship doesn't show up and feels like it matches our internal world of what we think is happening, there's kind of like a gap there. Usually, again, that focus goes outwards towards, if my partner could just be XYZ different, if they could do something different, if they could show up more like this, then I would be happy. And I want to switch that paradigm. I want to switch it to bringing that attention back inwards again and saying, how do I want to be with this moving forward? What do I want to bring to this relationship? How do I want to respond in a way that's creative instead of reactive? And it's where our biggest growth comes from. So it's where we feel the most vulnerable. It's where we feel almost kind of like we want that intimate love, but we really push it away because of how vulnerable it
Mm.
feels. So I just love working with people with this to know, to kind of show them where their power is versus where they fall into the feeling of almost being victimized by their circumstances.
Yeah, I love this so much. I think there's multiple things that are so valuable here. One is just our intimate relationships are just such a huge part of our life. And I don't think that many of us truly see it as a tool. Like we know that we're going to grow together. We know, or we hope that we're going
Mhm.
to grow together, but we don't really think about the how of how that's going to happen. And I think that using your relationship as a way to help reflect back to you what needs to change is so beautiful. And it's
Mhm.
also kind of counter to what you hear people say a lot, which is, or at least what I always heard growing up, which was like, focus on the I statements. Like,
Mhm.
well, I hear this or I need this. And that takes blame. They say that takes blame off your partner. But I think that it doesn't change anything, right? You're still not seeing
Yeah.
how you're showing up. It's just saying, like, well, this is what you're doing. And this is how I feel about
Yeah.
it. So something needs to change here, but I'm not going to take
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it can get so misconstrued of what we think is empowering because we're hearing all these tools and resources, but it's actually kind of a special finesse to be able to really say, oh, yeah, my partner is doing something I don't like, but what kind of energetic frequency am I carrying that's contributing to that dynamic in the first place? And so when we get lost in the surface level, which is really funny because I think so much of the time when we have a surface level disagreement or something that comes up, it's actually so much deeper than what's actually happening on the
Yeah.
surface. You know, on the surface, it could be that your partner didn't wash the dishes, but really all of a sudden there's this irritation and this resentment that's building up. And you can look at it very clearly and say, if my partner just washed the dishes, I would feel better. But really, if it's led to this big energetic blow up about it or something that's happening, that's almost kind of like there were so many little symptoms along the way that you weren't paying attention to where both of you were out of alignment. And then this one surface level thing just kind of caused everything to come crashing down and blow up in your face. And
Yeah.
so when we pay attention to how our energy is being carried throughout the day, where we're speaking our truth, where we are treating ourselves kindly internally, and therefore expecting the same kind of treatment from our partner, we can see so much more about how these things show up rather than just, I'm experiencing this and you're doing this, and go back to those really
Yeah.
simple I am statements that actually there's so much more depth there, I feel like, that we can tackle.
Yeah, that's so true. It's never the small things. Like the little
Never the
things
small things.
are just the sign that there's something bigger to address.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you're saying is, well, for me, it's so true. And I think, I hope for a lot of people listening, it will ring true too. But I know that it's also maybe a little bit different than what we've heard in the past. And there may be people who don't feel quite ready to hear that. Do you
Mm-hmm.
feel like there's a certain point maybe in your journey where something switched for you and it stopped being about the victimization or something happening to you and instead became like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, how did you come to the realization that you can use these tools to make yourself better instead of trying to change the world around you?
Yeah. Oh God, that's such a good way of phrasing that and asking that. I really think that for me, what really shifted, because I think that when most of us are on our awakening journeys, there's always these moments of really starting to connect in with the universe, magic, whatever you want to call it, God, anything along those lines. And I know I like kind of previously mentioned this, but there's usually a gap between what we think that we're understanding and then how our external world is showing up. We may think that we're monitoring our thoughts and carrying a positive vibe and all of these things are happening, and yet we're still having breakdowns happening around us. And we can kind of say, what am I doing wrong? This shouldn't be showing up this way if I'm, getting all of this correct inside. If I am monitoring my thoughts and having a positive vibe, my partner shouldn't be showing up in this way. So something must be wrong
Mm,
with them. Something must be wrong with the way that the rest of the world is showing up, which is funny because you kind of forfeit your control when that happens of You almost try to overly control how your life starts showing up around you. And that's not what's happening. When
Yeah.
those things show up and get into your space, I think what really shifted for me was noticing those things are going to continue to show up regardless of how high vibe you are, air quotes around the high vibe, or how connected you think that you are or are one within yourself, because there's always more to grow into. There's always more to become aware of. And so when there's conflict in your relationship or conflict that happens around you from other people or just the world in general, you're always being asked, who am I in response to this in
Mm.
every single moment? And if you fall back into some of your old patterns where you feel triggered by it, where you feel activated, where maybe you become a little bit more reactive, those circumstances are going to keep showing up to let you try again, to let you say, what about now? How do you want to be with this now? You have a little bit more awareness around it. What about now? And when that finally really clicked for me of there's not a picture perfect way that your life is going to show up, and life is chaotic. It's supposed to change you. It's supposed to mutate you and transform you and move the energies within you that you don't even know are there, so that you can then be a more expanded version of yourself to then bring in more and have space to hold more of what it is that you're trying to create. And something just clicked with me when I finally put that together. And then it became, oh my gosh, there's nothing actually wrong with how my partner is showing up. Even if I feel like I'm all kinds of high vibe and he's bringing down my energy to some extent because he's struggling, that's giving me a cue that maybe I can't actually handle my own internal struggle if I can't even sit with his. Why am I trying to change so much of who he's being or how my world is showing up? It's because I'm uncomfortable with it.
Mm.
And so the more that I can learn to be comfortable with it, the more that I can actually sit with that discomfort within myself. So something, yeah, something like really clicked into gear when I started to put that together and was like, huh, the more I'm trying to change how my life is showing up, the more I'm noticing I can't be with discomfort as much as I think I can.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe the more the same thing shows up, the more
Hmm.
you're like, okay, maybe this isn't something else that's happening around me. It's like that old saying, the grass is always greener, because we change and
Yeah.
change and change, thinking that the situation will change or how we respond to the situation will change, and it doesn't.
Yeah, it's definitely becomes a I'm the only variable here, really. So how do I want to keep being with this? Do I want to keep letting it unground me and activate me and throw me into my old same spirals and patterns and looping? Sometimes, because maybe I just need to learn a little bit more about who I am in that space. And
Yeah.
also, when I observe that and observe it and observe it, sometimes I can actually step back and then respond in a way that feels more aligned with however you want to say it, your higher version of yourself, your inner being, whatever that might be, but the version of you that you see yourself expanding into.
Yeah, it's so empowering. It gives,
Mhm.
like, it gives you the person back all of the power rather than all the people around you. I love that.
Yeah, I actually had a, if it's okay to share, I had a really big realization around anger with this for me. Um, So I'm not necessarily a very angry human. I've grown up kind of being in the people pleasing phase and always making sure everybody was taken care of around me to kind of protect myself. I grew up in a really turbulent household, so that just became one of my best skills was people pleasing and kind of reading the room, seeing where everybody else was, and then morphing myself to make sure that I didn't bring out any kind of unstable energies.
Mhm.
And being with my partner now, I feel so much more freedom with him. I feel like I can speak my voice. I feel like I can share what needs to be shared and said what needs to be said without it being taken, so personally or without it being something that completely derails us. So there's so much more freedom here. And yet sometimes when I didn't feel heard or I felt like I was being misunderstood, my voice would get so much louder. The anger would come in. It would kind of try to direct me that, hey, something is a little off here. We need to get back in balance. And I actually, this has been so fun for me to observe the past few weeks, a little bit more, probably a little bit longer, months now. But whenever I get louder and angrier and I let that voice come out for a while there, it almost kind of felt like, oh, no, it's okay. I'm just being empowered. I'm being assertive because I've never been that in my life. And the more that I actually realized, ooh, I don't actually feel empowered. I actually feel like I'm fighting to be heard. I feel like I am projecting how I'm feeling into my partner's space, which is then working him up. And now we're having this kind of battle between each other. And it doesn't actually feel good to raise my voice. And And so when I started to notice this pattern, my partner is just being my partner. It's nothing that he's doing or being or saying. Maybe it is, but it's how I'm reacting to it still. And
Yeah.
so I started to notice that when I would get really angry, that was a piece of me that was actually trying to get my attention. And so I started to heal this in little baby steps once I was observing it. And it became, okay, maybe this time I'm not going to raise my voice. Maybe I'm just going to stay silent and just let there be space for him to be speaking, for me to listen, for me to just kind of calm down. And I practiced that. And then the next time it became, okay, maybe I'm not going to withdraw my energy this time. Maybe I'm going to actually sit with him and make eye contact, still stay quiet, even when I feel like I want to raise my voice. And then the next time it was, okay, well, now he's holding my hand. I'm going to allow him to hold my hand instead of pulling it back and, being dramatic and like, no, I don't want to be in your space. And it just became something that became a process of softening into more and more and more and more. And strangely enough, not strangely enough, really, though, if we're being real, my partner started to respond to the way that I was showing up differently. And so he started to listen to me more. He started to hear what I was saying, attempted to understand me a little bit differently. And
Yeah.
so even though we have these patterns that show up, they don't have to be healed all at once. They can be healed in baby steps. And that's part of our healing process. That's part of the layers that are getting pulled back. And we
Yeah.
always have access to kind of seeing how that's showing up in our external world and what it's mirroring to us inside.
I love that you shared that. I think that was going to be my next question is like, where does somebody start if they start to notice similar patterns or they feel like, okay, this is really resonating. And I think you broke it down so beautifully of just like pick one thing that you're going to change a little bit this time and see how that lands and then maybe tweak it and kind of grow from there.
Yeah, I just feel like it gives your nervous system so much more space to adjust rather than I think when we're on this healing journey, we all say, it's funny, I was actually just talking to a client about this yesterday. I need to, if somebody's trying to improve themselves, it's like, I need more sleep. I need to be eating better. I need to be going for walks 5 times a day. I need to be working out 5 times a day is excessive. I need to be working out. I need to be drinking water. I need to be off my phone, no more scrolling, no more TV. And we have all these big things that we see. And then it feels so overwhelming because our nervous system can't cope with that. So we don't do anything. And then we just stay stuck in the same pattern over and over again. And it's the same way with conflict in relationships. When we're
Yeah.
trying to be this higher version of ourselves and completely change who we are, our nervous system can't adjust quickly enough. And so we just don't change anything and we keep on reacting differently. But when we
Mhm.
take little baby steps of, okay, I'm not going to fully change and completely, like with anger or me having a withdrawn energy when I get upset, I'm not going to completely just be like, okay, I'm here. Like, let's have this grounded, nice conversation. No, I'm probably still going to be a little bit withdrawn and a little bit back, but maybe I just lower my voice. And
Mhm.
those baby steps help us to expand and to feel safer to expand as we're kind of growing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like tiny habits, but for
Mm-hmm.
relationships and for personal growth.
Yeah. Oh, and it's amazing how much you can shift with those little tiny habits.
Yeah, I believe it. I think when my husband and I first started dating, we had a lot more blow ups, so to say. But I think a lot of that was just like learning how we
Mm-hmm.
each are and how we each respond to life. And like neither one of us quite knew what the other person needed. And with time, those have lessened and lessened. And now I have a tiny human that has thrown me back into that place again of having to assess how I'm responding to things. So I think this is another really beautiful like application of this self-growth process is through your small humans that test you and test you and test you and you have to really think about why am I responding this way or
Mm-hmm.
what is it that I need to change because yeah, I'm not going to be able to just like not be frustrated by you doing this crazy thing over and over again. Throwing the pot and pan on the floor just to make sounds after like the longest day ever when you're exhausted. To her, it's just
Mm-hmm.
fun. But then why do I respond that way? And then how do I change it? That's like the thing I love most about parenthood, I think, is it's just this constant question you're asking yourself of
Mm-hmm.
why am I responding in the way that I am? And how can I do it differently?
I love that so much because kind of like what you said, like you're just learning your partner's habits and how they need to be held, how they need to be talked to, how to support them a little bit differently. And I honestly think that I equate love with understanding. Like love to me is defined by understanding another person, basically trying to understand them so deeply that there isn't room for assumptions or to take something personally. And I
Mm.
assume that it goes the exact same with a tiny human as well. Of you're trying to understand, you're trying to see the world from their eyes and how much fun they're having when they're banging the pots, how much they're, how much innocence comes from everything that it is that they're doing and exploring and playing. And the more that you can understand them, or try to understand them, or try to understand your partner, I feel like the more that you start to understand yourself, because it kind of takes away that heavy, dense frequency of blame or complaining, which is usually when something feels out of your control and you try to look towards something in your circumstances to point blame at or
Mm.
to complain about, to kind of keep yourself in that same, it's kind of a harsh way of saying this, but in that victim mentality. It's a
Yeah.
victimhood frequency. But on the other side of that is freedom. And so the more that you can go deeper into these things and try to question them a little bit and say, this is something I do every time, but do I even know why? Is it even serving me anymore? Do I want to do something differently? Can I be somebody differently with this? And
Yeah.
that is the access into the freedom frequency, which is right on the other side of it.
I love the name for that. The freedom frequency. It's true.
Yes. Yeah.
And like what you said just made me think that doing this with children, like I think all relationships is so valuable, but I think there's something interesting about doing it with children where you can't blame a tiny human for anything. Like they have
Mm-hmm.
no control. They have no idea what life is. They don't even know what their personality is yet. And so in a way, it's a lot easier than doing it with a full grown adult who, you like, I remember there was a time where I felt a lot of, mm, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like, you're wrong, I'm right. Like, what is the word I'm looking for?
Oh my God, I know exactly what you're talking about, but it's not coming, it's
This
not
is
coming to
thank
me.
you, no sleep for 3 days,
Yeah.
and Atlas's Muller's coming in. Well, anyway, um, I think just that very much. Okay, so maybe a good way to explain this is like, this about me. When I growing up, had a very strong personality. I've always had a strong sense of who I am and how I see the
Mhm.
world. And when I was younger, I would say, I am my own guide. Like my mom would ask me to do something. And I'd be like, no, I'm my own guide. I don't have to do the thing that you're asking me to do, or whatever it was. I'm sure I used it in probably more appropriate ways too, that weren't just me being sassy, but
Mhm.
that showed up in my relationships as an adult, where I felt like my way was the right way in a way.
Mhm.
And having Atlas has made me rethink that so much, because she doesn't have a way that she's been conditioned into in at all.
Mhm.
And so it really makes me think like, if I am going to show her a way, is my way really the right way? Or is it just the one that I want to be right because it is my way, if that makes sense?
It does. I feel like this is something, it kind of sparks something. But it's kind of like your relationship with ego, right? Because anytime you identify in some way, that's your ego. And your ego is not a bad thing on any level, but there are lower and higher frequencies to any identification that you're sticking with. And so when we get really rooted in something, even though it might have felt really good and it might have given us so much and have opened up so much for us, that identification with something, it can also go wildly in the opposite direction if you're not mindful of it, right? Of
Yeah.
now all of a sudden, yeah, you're being your own guide is huge in this world in this day, because we're so heavily conditioned to look outside of ourselves and to depend on other people's wisdom and guidance and exactly what they've done. And we can kind of make ourselves smaller into this tiny little box of trying to be what everyone else needs us to be. And you basically being like, I'm my own guide, what a beautiful way that you broke out of that so early on. And since I've known you, you have always done exactly what you've wanted. And it's so empowering to watch and to witness, because it's not like you do it in a mean or an arrogant way. You're just like, no, this isn't for me. I'm going to excuse myself. I'm out. We've been in a
Yeah.
couple of uncomfortable situations where you've straight up just been like, I think I'm going to go to bed now. And just
Yeah.
left. And I was like, you could just leave? What do you mean?
Yeah.
And then on the other side of that is, yeah, your way is so beautiful for you, but Atlas is going to have her own way of doing things and seeing the world and her own way of communicating with her inner world. And
Mm,
so she's also like a little sponge right now. So she's going to be soaking up everything that you put in her space.
yeah.
And so just to have that beautiful awareness of like, huh, I might need to create a little bit of room for this to not always be true.
Yeah.
I just think that that's so brilliant for you to have acknowledged and even noticed.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think it's also interesting for me what you just said because I think that that served me very well for a long period of my life,
Mhm,
especially in my earlier 20s when I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing and I wanted to
mhm,
just be able to do my own thing. But it has presented a certain amount of closed-mindedness, I think, towards other people's opinions up until probably around when I met you, or maybe a little bit
mhm,
before when I met you. Like I would hear them, but I wouldn't really hear them. I'd be like, sure, I'm listening, but I know that my way is right.
mhm,
And I think it's only maybe in the last 5 years or so that something like really shifted for me in the sense that it's like a light turned and I was like, maybe my way isn't the right way. Maybe there are better ways of doing all of these things. And it was like, I went from being this like um, very secure in everything I was doing person to like very
mm,
curious about all
mhm.
of the ways to be type of person. And I honestly, I don't really know quite what that was. And I'm not mad about it. I think it's
Yeah.
now this phase of life is also serving me well, but it's just interesting to watch.
I love the way you phrase that too, because I like what I kind of heard is that you've developed such a level of trust that you can discern what feels good for you and what doesn't. So it's not that you're closed-minded anymore. Like I love the way that you said that you're curious about things and you're curious about what other people have to offer. But because you've done so much work on knowing who you are, you can discern what works for you and what doesn't.
Mm,
So like because I've kind of have found myself going through that phase as well too lately of, and maybe this is we're probably not going to touch too much on this, but projectors and human design, look it up, very interesting, all kinds of really fun stuff there. But projectors generally see this kind of bird's eye view and this huge vantage point, and we have to do things exactly in our own way and what feels good to us. And so, but we take in the energy of the world, so it's really easy to get conditioned and to not really know who we are
mm,
and just take in where everybody else is and what they're offering us and not really know how to discern what actually works for us and what doesn't. And
yeah.
so when I heard that, it was kind of like that's where I've been as well too, of yes, I know who I am and I know the way I want to move and I know the way the world is talking to me. And also I can now invite in other energies to share things with me and to get curious about to help guide me in different ways because I know how I respond to them and what feels good and what fits and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's just a huge level of discernment to be able to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel very grounded, surprisingly. Like for being more kind of curious and not 100% secure in the right answer all the time, I actually feel more
Mhm.
grounded now, I think, than I used to, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Which I think is really fun too, because I don't think there's really any right answers for anything. I think it's just
No.
how you relate to them. So if
Yeah.
something feels really expansive and exciting for you, then maybe it's really fun to relate to it in a way that it's serving you. And if something doesn't and it's right for everybody else, it's just as easy to be like, no, I don't want that. It's not for me, even though it's the right answer for everybody else as well.
So you've been working with people for a while now. Do you feel like there's a similar point in people's journey where they find you and they feel like, oh, this is what I need right now? Or is there kind of a common thread? Um, I'm just curious, like if somebody's listening and they're resonating with some of this, but they're like, I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, or I'm not sure if I'm at the place where I'm mentally open enough to start like really putting the light back on myself and shining a light in those dark places.
Yeah, I think that what I've noticed is the common thread with people that I work with is they usually have a lot of awarenesses around the trauma they carry, around the different patterns and habits that they have. the different patterns that keep showing up in their relationships and where they keep on seeing that they can't hold their lights, where they make themselves smaller, where they can't use their voice, whatever it might be, they're
Mhm.
aware of these things and they might have that spiritual knowledge of how to work with these things. And yet there's a gap between that and actually integrating it and embodying it. And
Yeah.
so usually when I'm working with people, it's because they have so much knowledge that they've kind of taken in and they just have no idea how to actually integrate it with their human. It's
Yeah.
almost kind of like there's this gap between their spiritual side, and then it kind of that spiritual side tends to maybe bypass through their actual human experience. And so that's what I would offer is if somebody notices that they might have all of the knowledge around how to deal with something or what they should be doing, and yet they
Mhm.
can't quite make that leap
Happen.
into actually embodying it and integrating it. That's where I usually come in.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's like this underlying knowledge. It's like we all know what we should do, but do we actually do it? And when you get
Mhm.
to that point where you're like, okay, I gotta actually do this, that's when they're ready for you.
Yeah, and that it looks so different for each person because that, the age old like I should be doing this thing is really funny because sometimes that's not how your soul actually wants to move. And so I think that that's where the breakdown can happen
Mm,
is each of us have a very unique soul language that's trying to communicate with us about the next step to take or how to be with something and where your energy wants to move. And again, it's trying to cut through all of the noise of the world. So even though you think you should do something a certain way, usually that breakdown of not being able to integrate into that is because your body doesn't want to move that way. Your energy doesn't want to move that way. There's something different that you may not be aware of over here. And so I kind of come in to help bridge that gap and help them connect into their soul language a little bit more and know what's actually working for them and where their energy wants to move and how to accomplish that,
yeah,
whether it
that's
be in their spiritual world or relationships.
yeah, that's such a beautiful point because I think we hear a lot of talk in the world, in personal development, especially about like the personalization of your path, especially when it comes to health, because that's the world I live in so much. Is like now we're just
Mhm,
really focused on personalized health. But I don't know yet, or I don't feel yet that we've really reached the point where everyone has consensus that there needs to be personalization in how we handle relationships. I think there still is so much of a commentary that, like, this is the way you handle this thing, or
mhm,
this is the way things should be done, even when we're talking about like business and marketing.
mhm.
And I think that what you bring in terms of maybe that's just not what your body needs or your energy needs right now is so important if something doesn't feel aligned.
Yeah, and it's so deeply connected to our health too, right? Like not only for that same idea of maybe one person needs something wildly different than another person would need for their health. And it's such a, you helped me explore this with my own health, but that my body just needed to move and work in a very different way that I needed to be in tune with rather than having all of the, you should be doing this and you should be doing that and this should be happening this way. We kind of worked with my body for my own personal wisdom to kind of come through. And it's funny, but the energetics of the world, the energetics of how your body wants to move and how you're showing up in relationships and how that's being mirrored back to you is probably one of the biggest factors that come into health as well too. Because if you're not moving with your energy in the way that it wants to move and you're resisting it, you're fighting against it, you're trying to morph yourself into something else, that's going to cause a buildup of dense energy in your body. And then
Mm.
that leads to health problems, that leads to sickness, that leads to, it's funny, I always notice this whenever I get a pain in my right shoulder, I know I'm storing some sort of anger. Like I just know now that immediately comes through of, oh, I'm okay, I'm angry at something, because it almost feels like this, like you want to punch something kind of feeling that comes through.
Yeah.
So all of these little breakdowns that we're talking about today lead to your overall health and well-being. If you can't really communicate who you are and you're moving inauthentically in this world, you're going to be so much more drained and exhausted. It's just
Mhm.
the tip of the iceberg for when it comes to your health journey as well too. So I've always
Mhm.
loved talking with you because our worlds so beautifully interact with one another and so beautifully align, even though we deal with wildly different, tools and things that we actually utilize for that.
That's true. The nitty-gritty is totally different, but the whole person picture that we're both dealing with is the same. And I think this happens so often. Like the number of people who come to me and say they have pains they can't explain, or this symptom that doesn't make any sense, and everyone has told them they're totally fine,
Mhm.
or the number of women who have done every quote unquote everything right. Like they're eating all the right things, exercising, sleeping, whatever it may be, and they just can't seem to feel better.
Mhm.
100% of the time, I will tell you, it's something spiritual or emotional or something they haven't dealt with in their past that is truly stopping them from getting to the next level physically. So, yeah, they're
Yeah.
just like so insanely linked. And
Mhm.
that link is so often ignored. So, I think this is such a valuable conversation.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I remember. So, you and I, we had started a business when we first met each other,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because we also worked with one other person as well too, and we had this kind of mind, body, soul, environment for our business to kind of flourish in. You were the body, I was the soul, our other friend was the mind, and what we noticed and why we no longer have that business intact anymore is because while all three parts of those are so important and so beautifully connected with one another, again, going back to baby steps, not every person who went through our program could handle all three at the same time. It
Yeah.
was, I'm doing this heavy spiritual work, I'm doing this heavy mind work. I can't even think about my diet. I can't even think about how to heal my relationship with food right now. And so, which is so often what was going on too, because we would attract people who had big emotional wounds that they were trying to heal through. And
Yeah.
same thing of if somebody is working with their food, maybe sometimes they don't have as much to give to what's going on within their mind so much of the time. But all of these three things are so interconnected, but you can only heal so much at once and bring your attention to so much at once. And so it comes in these little baby steps. And it does so much better when somebody is, okay, I'm ready for the physical part now. Okay, I'm ready for the emotional part now. And then they put all of their attention towards that piece.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And also, it's different for everyone. Like, if
Mhm,
somebody has really immediate physical needs that aren't being met, that's usually where they need to start. Like, I have to get them physically feeling 10% better
mhm,
before they can even see the light at the end of the tunnel to think about how to
mhm.
address their mind. And I think
Yeah,
alternatively, there's people that are like, no, I just need to dive in deep inside of me before I can even think about food. Like, that is not even on
yeah.
the table.
Yeah, like personally speaking, when I'm doing the heavy spiritual work, I actually crave comfort food. I crave having something because what happens is when we are integrating higher frequencies in our body naturally craves lowering that frequency again so that it can kind of reintegrate in our system in a way that feels safe and nurturing and isn't just going to fry us out and make us spin. And so I don't think about my diet nearly as much when I'm doing really, really hard, intense spiritual work because I'm like, I want the pizza tonight. I want the little treat. I want this little extra piece over here. Oh gosh, I'm eating really heavy foods. And then at some point that clicks into gear for me and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of over the heavy foods now. Now I just
Yeah.
want to like go back into my lighter foods and allow this higher frequency to be here. And I also have other people like you're speaking to who can't even remember to drink water.
Yeah.
And how are they going to deal with their emotional pain if they're not getting any kind of sleep, if they're not drinking water, if all they're eating is really heavy things and they're not allowing any kind of space for something new to come into their body? Like they have to get to a foundational place before they can invite in that heavy, deeper work.
And I think that what you just said brought something up for me, which is there's these like swings in life. Like we're
Mhm,
never going to be some one thing 100% of the time. And I think it's important that
mhm,
we remember that it's okay to use different tools at different times. Like you don't have to
mhm,
eat the quote unquote perfect diet or the perfect diet for you all the time. There will be times where your body needs something different to get through
mhm,
whatever it may be. Or you really do need to just like put all of your energy and attention towards this physical need and let the rest go for now. And I think that's just reasonable. And I think it's, there's so much in the world out there that's presenting this picture of the person who has it all, who's done
mhm.
everything, who is able to integrate mind, body, soul, relationships, everything all at once. They're like the picturesque mother. And I just want to remind people that you don't ever have to be that all the time, that you can pick what makes sense for you in this moment. And that also requires some self-awareness to know, okay, this is what I need right now And I'm going to give myself permission to just focus here for the moment.
Yeah, it's like a new definition of balance because I think that a lot of the time when we've heard like you need to be balanced, like again, like you had said, you're doing everything perfectly right every single part of the day all the time. And that's just not realistic. It's balance. I feel like when there's that new definition, kind of like what you're saying, is sometimes my relationship or my family is going to take the full center of my attention. Other times it's going to have to be my work.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to have to be my physical activity. Sometimes it's going to be the emotional depth and spiritual growth that I need to get to the next level. And having a balance is knowing when something needs to shift into whatever field it is that you're requiring a little bit more of at that time.
That's such a good way to describe it. I love that. So, I have a question that I like to ask people on this podcast show because it is called What We Tell Our Daughters. And that is if there's one piece of wisdom that you have to share with our our proverbial daughters, our future women of the world,
Mhm.
what would that be?
Oh, I really love this question. And I honestly think there's a million things that we could tell them and all of the wisdom, so many different layers. And I still think that the one that comes up for me the most is just knowing that if I'm speaking to somebody directly as a daughter, that you have your own way of moving through the world. You have your own unique soul language. You have your own interconnection, and your external world will always guide you, not by the wisdom from everybody else around you, but from noticing who you are being in reaction to how that external world is showing up. And so just to trust where your energy wants to move, even if it's a little bit differently than how everybody else thinks it should move, and to kind of build that compassion for yourself as you're learning to navigate it and learning to take all these baby steps to healing in a way that feels really good and aligned and feels like medicine to you rather than poison.
So good. So good. I'm going to just save that little part and like play it to Atlas every night because it's so
Oh,
good.
she's so special. I love seeing her
She
grow up.
Oh, thank you. Well, Krista, where can people find you if they want to learn more or work with you?
I have an Instagram and I have all of my links of how to work with me. I include lots of fun little reels and little quotes and things that kind of come up my way. And you can find that at Krysta.Kinslow is my Instagram handle. And that's spelled Krysta.Kinslow.
Perfect. And I will link to that in the notes for today.
Yay. Yeah, this has
Yay.
been so great. One of my favorite kinds of conversations.
Mine too, especially with a good new old friend. So thank you so
Right.
much. Yeah,
Love our friendship. Thank
for
you. Thank you
joining
for
me.
having me.
Yes, and I'm sure that people will resonate. I know I resonate with everything you shared, and I think it's eye-opening and it's a new way of seeing the world, and I hope that more and more mothers and more people who raise children start to think about the world in this way because we are raising the future of the world, and if we want to see it be
Mhm.
different, then we have to do things differently than they were before.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, our consciousness is growing as a planet and it's messy right now, but there's also a lot of really, really beautiful things in it and really beautiful ways to connect in a lot deeper with the rest of the world, the people around you, our societies, our communities. And I think that it's just one piece at a time.
Yeah, it's so true. All right,
Mhm.
well, thanks so much for joining me, and I'm sure I'll see you again.
Yay, sounds good. Thank you.